The massive space station rotated slowly against the backdrop of distant stars. Inside its metal halls, soldiers from across the galaxy walked together, but they did not walk as equals. Lieutenant Commander Zara Thorne watched a group of Krillian warriors march past her in the corridor. Their forearms moved in perfect rhythm, and their natural armor plates gleamed under the station's lights. Each one stood 8 feet tall and could crush a human skull with bare hands. They looked at Zara like she was a small child playing dress-up in military clothes. Behind them came 3 ethereal Nexus officers, their pale blue skin almost glowing as they spoke to each other without making any sound. Their large heads held brains that could connect across space itself. They moved their thin bodies like dancers, never bumping into anything, never needing to look where they stepped. Their black eyes glanced at Zara and moved on as if she was not worth their time. This was how things worked in the Galactic Coalition. For almost 100 years, different alien species had joined together to keep peace among the stars. Each species had their place in the military order, and that place depended on what they were naturally good at. The Krillians ruled the ground battles. Their thick skin could stop most bullets, and their 4 arms could carry twice as many weapons as anyone else. They had been warriors for thousands of years, and they never backed down from a fight. The ethereal Nexus controlled space warfare. They could speak to each other through thoughts alone, making their fleets move like one giant mind. No enemy could surprise them because they always knew what their allies were thinking and planning. The Gorvak Confederacy handled the heaviest fighting. These aliens looked like walking mountains made of living rock. They could lift tanks with their bare hands and walk through explosions that would kill anyone else. And then there were humans, soft, weak, and short-lived. Most aliens thought humans were only good for fixing machines and moving supplies. Humans died from things that other species would barely notice. They lived for only about 80 years, while most aliens lived for centuries. They got angry and scared, and made stupid decisions when they should stay calm. But Zara knew something that most aliens did not. She knew about the ghost companies. These were human military units that somehow got impossible jobs done. They went where other soldiers could not go and came back when everyone expected them to die. Most alien commanders thought the stories about these units were lies or luck, but Zara had seen the truth with her own eyes. She led one of these units herself. The 47th Expeditionary Response Team had earned a nickname that made even brave aliens nervous: Hell's Doorstep. When the Coalition had a job that seemed impossible, they sent the 47th. When other units failed and died, the 47th went in and finished what they started. Zara's team was different from normal human soldiers. They trained harder and thought differently. They looked at problems in ways that confused alien minds. Where other species saw obvious answers, humans saw 10 different ways to break the rules. The Coalition's current problem was bigger than anything they had faced before. Reports came in every day about the Void Swarm, an enemy from outside their galaxy. These creatures moved like a giant hive mind, eating everything in their path. Entire star systems disappeared when the swarm arrived. The aliens were scared. Their usual tactics did not work against an enemy that learned and changed during every battle. The Krillian armor meant nothing when the swarm created new weapons that cut through it. The ethereal mind link became useless when the enemy had millions of minds working as one. Even the mighty Gorvak found themselves overwhelmed by creatures that simply kept coming, no matter how many died. In the Coalition War Room, alien generals argued about strategy, while holographic displays showed red dots spreading across star maps. Each red dot was a solar system that no longer existed. General Vexatar, the supreme Krillian commander, slammed one of his 4 fists on the table. "We need more warriors, more ships, more firepower." Admiral Kilthara of the Ethereal Nexus shook her large head. "Brute force will not work. This enemy adapts too quickly. We need a new approach." "What new approach?" Vexatar growled. "We are already using our best forces, our finest strategies. What else can we do?" The alien commanders continued arguing, but none of them looked toward the small group of human officers standing quietly in the corner. To them, humans were useful for carrying messages and making coffee, not for winning wars. But Admiral Kilthara had been studying the human files lately. Something about these creatures puzzled her. On paper, humans should be the weakest species in the Coalition. Yet somehow, their special units achieved results that made no logical sense. She had read the report about the 47th's mission to Kepler-7, where they destroyed an enemy fortress that 3 Krillian battalions could not scratch. She had seen the intelligence about human teams infiltrating enemy positions that ethereal scouts could not even find. She had watched video recordings of human soldiers doing things that violated every rule of military science. The problem was that none of it made sense according to accepted wisdom about warfare. Humans should not be able to do these things. They were too small, too weak, too emotional, and too unpredictable, but they kept doing them anyway. Zara felt her communication device vibrate against her wrist. A message appeared on the small screen. Report to Bay 94. New assignment, maximum priority. She looked around the war room one more time. The alien commanders were still arguing about tactics and deployment schedules. None of them knew that their salvation might come from the species they trusted least. As Zara walked toward the exit, she passed a group of young ethereal officers. One of them, a female named Veltar, watched her with curious black eyes. Veltar had been assigned to study human psychology, but her research kept producing impossible results. According to every scientific model, humans should be the first species to break under pressure. Instead, they seemed to get more dangerous when things got worse. "Excuse me," Veltar said, her voice soft and musical. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne." Zara stopped and turned around. "Yes. I have been reading about your unit's previous missions. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about human tactical philosophy." Zara smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that made smart people nervous. "What do you want to know?" "How do humans achieve success in situations where failure should be mathematically certain?" "That's easy," Zara replied. "We don't think about the math until after we win." Veltar blinked her large eyes, trying to process this answer. By the time she realized that Zara was already walking away, the human officer had disappeared around a corner. Soon, Veltar thought she would understand why even alien soldiers were learning not to defy humanity's deadliest units. The main briefing room could hold 3,000 officers, but today it felt too small. Representatives from every coalition species packed the space, their different body shapes and sizes creating a strange rainbow of alien forms. At the front of the room, a massive holographic display showed the Kepler barrier, 7 star systems arranged in a line between coalition space and the advancing void swarm. General Vextar stood at the podium, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he spoke. His natural armor plates caught the light from the display, making him look like a living statue of war. "The enemy has consumed 47 star systems in the past 2 months," he announced, his voice booming through the room's speakers. "They show no signs of slowing down. If we cannot stop them at the Kepler barrier, they will reach the heart of coalition space within 6 months." The room buzzed with nervous conversation in a dozen different languages. Alien officers checked their data tablets and whispered to their neighbors. Everyone understood what those words meant. This was not just another battle. This was a fight for survival. "Operation Starwall will be the largest military action in coalition history," Vextar continued. "Every available ship, every trained soldier, every weapon we can build. We will make our stand at Kepler 442, the central system of the barrier." Admiral Kilthara glided forward, her ethereal form seeming to float rather than walk. When she spoke, her words appeared directly in everyone's minds rather than through their ears. Intelligence suggests the Void Swarm operates as a collective consciousness. They learn from every encounter and adapt their tactics accordingly. Previous engagements show they can modify their approach within hours of first contact. A Gorvak general, his stone-like features carved into a permanent scowl, raised one massive hand. "What about civilian evacuation? Kepler systems hold over 50 million inhabitants. Evacuation operations will run parallel to our defensive preparations," Vextar replied. "Transport ships will move civilians to secure systems while our main force engages the enemy." That was when he turned toward the small section where human officers sat, his 4 eyes fixed on Lieutenant Commander Thorne with barely concealed contempt. "Human units will provide rearguard support for evacuation operations. Your job is to protect civilian transports and ensure refugee processing runs smoothly. This is vital work that requires attention to detail." The message was clear. While real soldiers fought the real war, humans would handle the safe, simple jobs that did not require actual combat ability. Several alien officers chuckled at this assignment. The sound echoed through the room like a cruel joke. Humans protecting the people who ran away while brave aliens died in battle. But Zara did not react. Neither did the other human Special Forces commanders scattered throughout the room. They had heard this kind of talk before. Let the aliens think what they wanted to think. After the briefing, officers filed out of the room in groups according to their species. Zara waited until most of the crowd had left before approaching the holographic display. She studied the tactical information, noting details that the alien commanders had either missed or ignored. Examining the battlefield, Lieutenant Commander. Zara turned to find Veltar approaching, the young ethereal's dark eyes focused on the display. Something like that, Zara replied. What do you see when you look at this setup? Veltar tilted her head, considering the question. A logical defensive position. The Kepler systems form a natural choke point. Our forces will have clear fields of fire and established supply lines. And the Void Swarm. They will be forced to attack through predictable approaches. Their numbers advantage will be reduced by the narrow passage between systems. Zara nodded slowly. That's what your commanders see too. Standard military thinking. Is there something wrong with that analysis? Instead of answering directly, Zara pointed to several areas on the display. Look at the sensor reports from previous swarm attacks. Notice anything interesting about their timing? Veltar studied the data, her enhanced brain processing information faster than any human could. After a moment, her expression changed. They always attack when defenders are most confident in their preparations. Exactly. And look at their approach patterns. They do not just adapt during battle, they study their enemies beforehand. Every predictable attack route we give them is information they can use against us. The ethereal officer's eyes widened as she began to understand. You believe this is a trap. I think the swarm wants us to think we are setting a trap for them, Zara corrected. The question is what they have learned about coalition tactics that we have not figured out yet. Veltar was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this perspective. Have you shared this theory with the command staff? Zara's smile was bitter. I tried. General Vextar told me that humans worry too much because we are naturally fearful. Admiral Kilthara said my concerns were based on emotion rather than logic. But you are still concerned. I am terrified, Zara admitted. When humans are terrified, we usually have good reasons. Over the next week, the Coalition fleet assembled at the outer edge of Kepler space. Ships from every member species formed the largest armada in galactic history. Krillian dreadnoughts bristled with weapons. Ethereal carriers launched clouds of fighters that moved like flocks of metal birds. Gorvak fortress ships looked like flying mountains, ready to smash anything that got in their way. The human contingent was much smaller. 4 special operations teams, a few support vessels, and a handful of transport ships assigned to evacuation duty. Most aliens barely noticed they were there, but Zara noticed other things during the fleet's approach to Kepler 442. Her communications team intercepted fragments of Void Swarm transmissions that did not match previous patterns. The enemy was using new encryption methods and different coordination signals. She brought this information to the command staff again. Again, they dismissed her concerns. Lieutenant Commander General Vexistar said during a planning meeting, "Your species has a tendency to see threats that do not exist. We appreciate your caution, but military decisions must be based on facts, not fears." These are facts, Zara insisted, holding up her data tablet. The swarm is communicating differently than before. They are preparing something new. New tactics are expected, Admiral Kilthara replied through the mental link. Adaptation is their primary characteristic. Our strategies account for this. But Zara had read the classified reports. She knew how previous battles had gone. Coalition forces would engage the swarm using proven tactics. For the first few hours, everything would work perfectly. Then the enemy would start changing, adapting, learning. Within half a day, coalition advantages would disappear. Within a full day, coalition forces would be retreating or dead. The difference this time was scale. If Operation Starwall failed, there would be nowhere left to retreat to. 3 days before the expected enemy arrival, Zara called a private meeting with her team leaders. They gathered in a small conference room aboard their assigned transport ship, away from alien surveillance. "How are the evacuation preparations going?" she asked Sergeant Hassan, her demolitions expert. Civilian transports are loaded and ready to jump to safe systems on command, Hassan reported. The aliens think we are just babysitting scared refugees. Good. What about our real preparations? Captain Rodriguez, her intelligence officer, activated a scrambled data display. We have identified 17 potential weak points in the swarm's approach routes. If they follow standard adaptation patterns, we can hit them where they are not expecting resistance. Equipment status. All special packages are loaded and ready. Lieutenant Park, her weapons specialist, confirmed. The aliens think we are carrying medical supplies and emergency rations. Zara looked around the room at her officers. These people had followed her through battles that should have killed them all. They trusted her judgment, even when that judgment led to missions with 90% casualty rates. You all know what we are really here for, she said quietly. When this battle goes bad, and it will go bad, we are going to be the only thing standing between the swarm and 50 million civilians. What about our orders to stay in the rear? Rodriguez asked. Our orders are to protect the evacuation. Sometimes the best way to protect something is to make sure the enemy never gets close enough to threaten it. The room was silent for a moment as her team absorbed this. They understood what she was saying. When the time came, they would disobey direct orders from alien command and do what needed to be done. Any questions? Zara asked. Sergeant Hassan raised his hand. Just one. When the aliens figure out what we are doing, are they going to court-martial us or give us medals? Probably both, Zara replied, assuming any of us survive long enough for it to matter. The Void Swarm arrived exactly when Coalition intelligence said it would. What intelligence had not predicted was how wrong everything else would be. General Vextar watched from the command deck of his flagship as enemy contacts appeared on the tactical display. Thousands of red dots emerged from hyperspace, moving in formations that looked familiar from previous battle reports. The Krillian general smiled, showing teeth designed for tearing flesh. All units, initiate formation Delta 7, he commanded. Gorvac fortress ships advance to engagement range. Ethereal fighters provide cover. Krillian assault vessels prepare for boarding operations. The Coalition fleet moved like a well-oiled machine. Every ship knew its role. Every captain understood the plan. This was how space battles were supposed to work. Organized, logical, professional. For exactly 43 minutes, everything went perfectly. Gorvac fortress ships opened fire with their massive guns, creating walls of destruction between the fleets. Ethereal fighters swarmed enemy vessels like angry insects, their pilots linked. Together, in perfect coordination, Krillian assault ships waited for openings, ready to ram through enemy lines and deploy boarding parties. The Void Swarm responded with predictable tactics. Their bioships absorbed damage while smaller attack craft tried to overwhelm Coalition defenses through numbers. It looked like every previous engagement, only bigger. Then the enemy changed. The first sign was subtle. Swarm attack craft started moving in patterns that confused ethereal fighter pilots. Instead of swarming randomly, they began using coordinated maneuvers that broke the mental link between Coalition pilots. Something is different, Admiral Kilthera reported, her mental voice tight with concern. The enemy is using formations specifically designed to disrupt our tactical coordination. General Vexistar frowned but maintained confidence. Adaptation is expected. Continue the assault. But the changes kept coming. Swarm bioships began focusing their fire on specific weak points in Gorvac armor that should have been impossible for them to know about. Enemy vessels started using weapons that cut through Krillian natural armor like it was made of paper. Within 2 hours, Coalition formations were falling apart. Ships that had never retreated from battle found themselves fleeing for their lives. The mighty Krillian dreadnoughts, pride of the galaxy's finest warriors, were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to know their every weakness. All units fall back to secondary positions, Vexitar ordered, his 4 hands gripping the command console until his knuckles turned white. That was when the real disaster began. The Void Swarm did not chase the retreating Coalition fleet. Instead, they split into smaller groups and headed directly for the civilian evacuation ships. Lieutenant Commander Zara Thorne received the emergency signal aboard her transport vessel while watching refugee families file into escape pods. Children clutched their parents' hands while adults tried to stay calm despite the terror in their eyes. "Ma'am," Sergeant Hassan reported, checking his scanner, "we have incoming. Lots of incoming. Swarm attack craft. heading this way fast. How long until they reached the civilian transports? Zara asked. 18 minutes at current speed. And how long until the main fleet can come back to help us? At least 4 hours, assuming they can break free from the main enemy force. Zara looked out the viewport at the evacuation convoy. Hundreds of ships filled with millions of people who trusted the coalition to protect them. The alien generals had put these transports in the rear because they thought it was safe. Now those same generals were too busy saving their own forces to help. "All teams, this is Hell's Doorstep," she announced over the secure channel. "Time to earn our nickname." What happened next confused every military analyst who later studied the battle recordings. The 47th Expeditionary Response Team did not fight like any other unit in coalition forces. They did not form defensive lines or establish firing positions. Instead, they scattered across the asteroid field surrounding the evacuation route like hunters setting up an ambush. When the first swarm attack craft arrived, they found the space around the transports empty except for floating rocks and debris. The alien pilots probably thought the human escorts had already fled. They were wrong. Sergeant Hassan had spent the previous 3 days turning asteroids into improvised explosives. When swarm ships moved into the field, he triggered charges that sent massive rocks flying like bullets from a giant shotgun. Ships that survived the initial bombardment found themselves tangled in metal cables that Captain Rodriguez had strung between asteroids. The enemy adapted quickly, as always. They started using different approach routes and scanning for traps. But every time they changed tactics, the humans changed too. And they changed faster. Lieutenant Park used the convoy's own cargo containers as weapons, ejecting them into space with tiny rocket motors that turned shipping boxes into guided missiles. When the swarm started shooting down the containers, she switched to using the contents instead, creating clouds of metal scraps that shredded enemy hull plating. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Human soldiers used tactics that violated every rule in military textbooks. They turned civilian equipment into weapons, used the evacuation ships themselves as cover, and employed strategies that put their own lives at extreme risk. But they held. For 18 hours, the 47th and 3 other human special operations teams fought off a swarm force 50 times their size. They used the environment like a weapon, turning empty space into a death trap for anything that tried to threaten the civilian convoy. Veltar, the young ethereal officer, watched the battle from her observation post aboard a coalition cruiser. Her advanced brain tried to analyze human combat patterns, but nothing made sense according to conventional military theory. She watched human soldiers continue fighting with injuries that would have killed most aliens. She saw them coordinate attacks without any telepathic link, somehow knowing what their teammates needed without being told. Most disturbing of all, she observed their complete willingness to sacrifice themselves for people they had never met. The turning point came when a massive swarm bioship broke through the human defensive perimeter and headed straight for the largest refugee transport. The ship carried over 500,000 civilians, including thousands of children. Sergeant Hassan was already wounded, his left arm hanging useless at his side and blood streaming from a head injury that should have knocked him unconscious. But when he saw the enemy ship approaching the transport, he made a decision that would be remembered across the galaxy. Hassan's small fighter craft was loaded with enough explosives to destroy a small moon. Instead of using them as planned, he aimed his ship directly at the bioship and pushed his engines to maximum power. "Hell's Doorstep to all units," he transmitted over the radio, his voice calm despite the blood running down his face. "Tell my wife I kept my promise." The explosion could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, both Hassan's fighter and the massive swarm bioship were gone, leaving only empty space and 500,000 people who would live to see their families again. Word of the battle spread through coalition forces faster than any official report. Alien soldiers who had dismissed humans as weak began asking different questions. How had such a small force held off such overwhelming odds? What kind of species willingly threw themselves into impossible battles? General Vextar received the first detailed reports while his own forces were still retreating from the main engagement. The proud Krillian warrior read the numbers 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Human casualties, 60%. Enemy casualties, 43% of the attack force. Civilians evacuated successfully, 100%. For the first time in his long military career, General Vextar began to wonder if he had seriously misunderstood something about warfare. Aboard her cruiser, Veltar finished compiling her observations and sent a message to Coalition High Command. The subject line read, "Urgent revision required, Human Combat Effectiveness Assessment." In the report she wrote, "Previous estimates of human military capability appear to be fundamentally flawed. Recommend immediate tactical consultation with human special operations commanders. These units demonstrate combat effectiveness that exceeds all known parameters for their species." But she did not include her personal conclusion, the thought that kept her awake for days afterward. Humans were not weak because they bled and died easily. They were terrifying because they bled and died willingly, and they somehow turned that willingness into a weapon that could destroy enemies 10 times their size. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you finally gave humanity's deadliest units the respect they had always deserved. General Vextar had never asked another species for help in his 3 centuries of military service. Today, he swallowed his pride and walked toward the human quarters aboard the Coalition flagship. The loss reports made for grim reading. 70% of his elite Krillian forces were dead or missing. The ethereal Nexus had lost half their fleet, their perfect coordination shattered by an enemy that somehow learned to disrupt their mental links. Even the mighty Gorvac Confederacy was down to 30% strength after watching their fortress ships get torn apart like metal toys. Only the humans had succeeded in their mission. Not only succeeded, but exceeded every expectation while fighting with weapons that other species would consider scraps and leftovers. He found Lieutenant Commander Thorne in the ship's planning room, standing over a tactical display with 3 other human officers. They were drawing lines on star charts and making calculations on data tablets, their faces serious but calm. When Vextar entered the room, the humans looked up but did not salute. In human military culture, he had learned, respect was earned through actions rather than rank. After what he had witnessed, he was not sure he had earned their respect yet. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne," he said, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a formal position, "I would like to request a tactical consultation." Zara studied his face for a moment, probably looking for signs of the contempt he had shown before. When she spoke, her voice was neutral and professional. "What do you want to know?" "How do we stop them? The Void Swarm adapts to everything we try. Our best strategies become useless within hours, but your people found a way to fight them effectively." "We did not fight them effectively," Zara corrected. "We barely survived. The difference is that we expected to barely survive." Vexitar's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "I do not understand." Captain Rodriguez, the human intelligence officer, gestured to the tactical display. "Your forces plan for victory. You develop strategies based on your advantages and expect those advantages to carry you through battle. When the enemy adapts and removes those advantages, your plans fall apart." "Human forces plan for disaster," added Lieutenant Park, the weapons specialist. "We assume everything will go wrong, our equipment will fail, and the enemy will be stronger than expected. Then we design tactics that work even under those conditions." Vextar looked at the tactical display, trying to understand this perspective. "But how can you achieve victory if you expect defeat?" "We do not expect defeat," Zara explained. "We expect chaos. There is a difference. Defeat means giving up. Chaos means the situation is unpredictable and both sides have problems. Humans are very good at functioning when everything is unpredictable." The Krillian general studied their tactical notes. Human strategy looked insane by normal military standards. They planned to split their forces, use improvised weapons, and deliberately put themselves in situations where retreat would be impossible. "This seems extremely dangerous," he said finally. "War is dangerous," Zara replied. "The question is whether you want to take calculated risks or wait for the enemy to choose your risks for you." Over the next day, word spread through the Coalition fleet that humans were now serving as tactical advisors to alien command staff. The response from different species varied dramatically. Some younger alien officers were curious about human methods. They had seen the battle, reports, and wanted to understand how such a weak species could achieve such impossible results. Older commanders were skeptical or openly hostile. Many believed that human tactics would get everyone killed through reckless aggression and poor planning. But Admiral Kilthera of the Ethereal Nexus had been studying human psychology for weeks now. She understood that human unpredictability was not a weakness to be corrected, but a weapon to be employed. Their neural patterns show something we have never encountered, she reported to the Joint Command meeting. Other species develop predictable responses to combat stress. Humans become more creative when under pressure. Creativity does not win battles, complained General Mortok of the Gorvak Confederacy, his stone-like features showing disapproval. Discipline wins battles. Strategy wins battles. Discipline and strategy failed against the Void Swarm, Zara pointed out from her position at the planning table. They learned all our discipline tactics and defeated them systematically. Then what do you propose? Vextar asked. Zara activated a new tactical display showing the Kepler barrier systems. We stop trying to match their adaptability and start using our unpredictability. The plan she presented horrified every alien commander in the room. Instead of gathering forces for a single massive battle, she proposed letting the Void Swarm advance deeper into the Kepler systems. Then, instead of fighting them head-on, human teams would launch simultaneous attacks on 17 different targets using completely different tactics. Each team will employ unique methods, she explained, highlighting different areas on the display. The enemy will not be able to adapt because they will not know what they are adapting to. The casualty projections for this plan are unacceptable, Admiral Kilthara observed, her mental voice tight with concern. The casualty projections assume 90% losses among human special operations units, Zara confirmed. We consider this acceptable. The room fell silent. Every alien present tried to process what they had just heard. Humans were calmly discussing tactics that would kill 9 out of every 10 participants. Acceptable? General Mortok rumbled. How is 90% casualties acceptable? Because the alternative is 100% casualties for everyone, Captain Rodriguez answered, pulling up projections showing swarm advance rates. If we do nothing, the enemy reaches Coalition core worlds in 4 months. Every sentient being in the galaxy dies. But surely there must be another way, Veltar said, speaking up from her observer position. Some strategy that does not require such sacrifice. Lieutenant Park laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You still do not understand. This is not sacrifice to us. This is what we were designed for. Designed? Every other species evolved for survival, Zara explained. Humans evolved for warfare. Our bodies are weak, but our minds are built for violence. We can function effectively while wounded, scared, and outnumbered because those are the conditions our ancestors faced every day for millions of years. She gestured to the tactical display showing human attack plans. These missions look insane because sanity is a luxury we cannot afford. The Void Swarm expects logical responses from logical opponents. We are going to give them chaos instead. The debate continued for hours. Alien commanders proposed modifications to make the plan safer, but every modification also made it more predictable. Finally, Vextar made the decision that would determine the fate of the galaxy. We will implement the human strategy as proposed, he announced. All units will provide support for human special operations teams. General, Admiral Kilthara protested. The risks of failure are greater than the risks of success, Vextar replied. I have seen what happens when we fight the enemy on their terms. Perhaps it is time to fight them on human terms. Within hours, human teams were loading equipment and preparing for missions that read like suicide notes. They checked weapons that had been cobbled together from spare parts. They studied target information for installations that should be impossible to destroy. They wrote letters to families they would probably never see again. But they did not seem afraid. If anything, they seemed energized by the challenge. Veltar watched the preparations from an observation deck, trying to understand the psychology she was witnessing. Are they not concerned about the odds? She asked Zara. Concerned? Yes. Worried? No. Zara checked her equipment one more time, running through the mental checklist that had kept her alive through dozens of impossible missions. Worry is about things you cannot control. We can control how we fight and how we die. Everything else is just details. And if the plan fails, then we will improvise something else. Humans are very good at improvising. As the human teams departed for their missions, alien commanders watched from command centers across the fleet. They were about to witness warfare conducted by a species that treated certain death as an acceptable starting point for tactical planning. The galaxy was about to learn why even alien soldiers had stopped defying humanity's deadliest units. The Battle of Kepler's Last Stand began when 17 human teams simultaneously launched attacks that made no logical sense. At Kepler 442, Lieutenant Commander Thorne's team used the system's own star as a weapon. They rigged massive reflector arrays to focus solar energy into concentrated beams, turning the entire solar system into a giant laser. When Void Swarm bioships tried to approach, they found themselves being cooked by their own target. 3 systems away, Captain Chen's demolition team collapsed an entire asteroid mining operation onto a swarm hive cluster. They had spent 2 days carefully placing explosive charges throughout the facility, timing everything so that 10 billion tons of metal and rock would fall in a specific pattern. The resulting impact created gravitational waves that disrupted swarm navigation systems across half the sector. At Kepler 438, Sergeant Williams discovered that swarm bioships were vulnerable to a specific frequency of electromagnetic pulse. Instead of using traditional weapons, his team rewired the entire planetary communication network to broadcast directly into enemy ships. The pulse scrambled their organic neural systems, leaving the creatures floating helplessly in space. Every human attack was different. Every tactic was impossible to predict. Some teams used gravity as a weapon, deliberately destabilizing gas giants to create massive explosions. Others turned space stations into kinetic projectiles, launching entire facilities at enemy formations like enormous bullets. The most memorable attack came from Sergeant Torres, who discovered that void swarm creatures communicated through biochemical signals. Her team spent 18 hours synthesizing fake pheromones that translated roughly to retreat immediately, overwhelming force detected. When they broadcast these signals into the enemy formation, half the swarm fleet turned around and fled from battles they were winning. From his command ship, General Vextar watched tactical displays that showed impossible results. Human forces representing less than 8% of coalition strength were destroying enemy units faster than the main alien fleets had ever managed. "How are they doing this?" he asked Admiral Kilthara, his 4 hands gripping the tactical console as he tried to understand what he was seeing. "They are violating every principle of military science," she replied through the mental link, her thoughts tinged with amazement and horror. "They use weapons that should not work, employ tactics that should fail, and somehow achieve victory through methods that our computer models say are impossible." But the most shocking moment came when the Void Swarm tried its ultimate adaptation. The hive mind attempted to coordinate a response to human chaos by creating new battle forms specifically designed to counter unpredictable tactics. The swarm failed. For the first time in their existence as a species, the void creatures encountered an enemy they could not understand well enough to defeat. Human unpredictability was not a tactic they could adapt to because it was not really a tactic at all. It was simply how humans functioned when survival was at stake. Every time the swarm created a solution to one human attack method, 3 different human teams would invent entirely new ways of killing them. The enemy's greatest strength, their ability to learn and adapt, became useless against opponents who made up new rules faster than anyone could learn them. The turning point came when multiple swarm hive clusters began broadcasting what ethereal translators recognized as distress signals. The collective consciousness that had consumed 47 star systems was experiencing something it had never felt before: confusion and fear. Lieutenant Commander Thorne received the recall order while her team was preparing to ram their transport ship into a swarm command vessel. The message was brief: "All units return to fleet. Enemy retreat confirmed." When she reached the Coalition flagship, she found alien commanders standing around tactical displays showing red dots moving away from the Kepler barrier systems. The Void Swarm, seemingly unstoppable force that had threatened the entire galaxy, was fleeing. "Damage assessment," General Vextar announced as she entered the command room. "Coalition losses 32% overall. Human special operations losses 61%. Enemy losses estimated 78% of attacking force." The room was quiet as everyone absorbed those numbers. Humans had taken the heaviest casualties, as expected, but they had also inflicted more damage on the enemy than any other coalition force. Lieutenant Commander Thorn, Vexus Tar continued, "I owe you an apology and an explanation. Sir, I spent 3 centuries believing that warfare was about strength, discipline, and superior tactics. Your people have taught me that sometimes warfare is about something else entirely." Admiral Kilthara approached the tactical display, her ethereal form seeming to glow with excitement. "I have been analyzing swarm communication intercepts from the battle. Their retreat was not tactical, it was psychological. They fled because they could not predict what humans would do next." "Fear," Veltar added from her observation post. The Void Swarm experienced fear for the first time in their species' existence. Over the following weeks, news of the battle spread throughout Coalition space. The official reports were impressive enough. The first major victory against the Void Swarm, the successful defense of the Kepler barrier, the preservation of 50 million civilian lives. But it was the unofficial stories that changed everything. Alien soldiers talked about human teams that kept fighting with wounds that should have been fatal. They shared recordings of human commanders calmly discussing tactics that had 90% casualty rates. They described watching humans turn cargo containers into guided missiles and communication networks into weapons of mass destruction. The galaxy's military hierarchy began to shift almost immediately. Krillian warriors, proud descendants of millennia of battlefield tradition, started requesting human tactical advisors for their operations. The request forms always included the same phrase: to ensure mission success through unconventional methods. Ethereal Nexus fleet commanders began studying human neural patterns, trying to understand how a species could function effectively while being completely unpredictable. Their research papers had titles like "Controlled Chaos as Military Doctrine" and "The Strategic Value of Tactical Insanity." Gorvac Confederacy engineers started building weapons based on human design principles. Their new motto became, "If it seems impossible, it might just work." The changes went beyond military doctrine. Human units that had been treated as support personnel were suddenly redesignated as Tier Alpha Forces, a classification that had not existed before because no one imagined it would be needed. The 47th Expeditionary Response Team, rebuilt after 60% casualties, found their nickname officially adopted by Coalition Command. They were now formally known as Hell's Doorstep, and their mission briefings came with warnings that other species should maintain safe distances during operations. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler's Last Stand, Veltar published her research paper on human military effectiveness. The document became required reading at every military academy in Coalition space. Her conclusion was simple. Previous estimates of human combat capability were based on the assumption that military effectiveness correlates with physical advantages. This assumption is incorrect. Human effectiveness derives from psychological factors that enable them to function optimally under conditions that would incapacitate other species. But the real change was visible in the behavior of alien soldiers throughout Coalition forces. They no longer mocked human units or dismissed their capabilities. Instead, they watched human special operations teams with a mixture of respect and healthy fear. Young alien officers asked their commanders about rumors of human achievements. The answers had become standardized across all Coalition forces. There are 3 rules for working with human special operations, veteran officers would explain. First, never question their methods, no matter how insane they sound. Second, when they volunteer for something, step back and let them work. Third, if you ever hear a human say, "Hold my beer," you run as fast as your species can manage. The final scene took place in the same briefing room where General Vextar had originally assigned humans to babysitting duty. Now he stood at the podium addressing his command staff about their next operation against remaining Void Swarm clusters. Coalition intelligence has identified 3 enemy strongholds in the Outer Rim, he announced. Each position is heavily fortified and considered extremely dangerous. He paused, looking directly at Lieutenant Commander Thorn. "Lieutenant Commander, what is the 47th's assessment of these targets?" Zara studied the tactical display for a moment, then smiled. It was the kind of expression that made smart aliens nervous. "Looks like fun," she said. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Everyone present understood what those words meant. The humans had found another impossible mission to complete. As the briefing ended and officers filed out to prepare for deployment, Veltar approached Zara with a final question. "Are you not concerned about the risks?" the ethereal asked. "Concerned? Always. But we learned something important during the battle." Zara replied, checking her equipment one more time. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. Someone has to handle the dangerous jobs. And humans are willing to do this. Humans are built for this. The difference is that now everyone else finally understands that." Outside the briefing room windows, Coalition ships prepared for their next mission. Human teams loaded equipment that other species would consider impossible to use effectively. They studied target information for installations that should be impossible to destroy. They prepared for battles that should be impossible to win. But impossibility had become a human specialty, and the galaxy was finally ready to let them work.